I didn't realize I was alone until the music stopped. That's the moment that still plays back in my head with uncomfortable clarity. Not the doors locking, not the lights shutting off. The silence. 1 second, that familiar, forgettable department store music was floating through the air, soft, generic, the kind you never notice until it's gone, and then it vanished so suddenly it felt unnatural. No gradual fade, no announcement, just silence, thick and immediate, like someone had stuffed cotton into my ears. I was standing in the home goods aisle, holding a package of dish towels I didn't need and had no intention of buying. I remember staring at the price tag longer than necessary, not because I cared about the cost, but because my brain hadn't caught up with what my senses were telling me. Something had changed, and I didn't yet know what it was. I checked my watch. 9:47 p.m. The store closed at 9:30. At first, I didn't panic. I was in my late 50s at the time, living alone, retired early after a long career that taught me not to jump to conclusions. Losing track of time wasn't new to me. It happens more often than people like to admit, especially as you get older. I told myself the staff was still around, finishing closing procedures, counting cash drawers, cleaning, locking offices. All normal still. I couldn't ignore the feeling creeping up my spine. This was one of those massive American department stores, the kind built like a warehouse, with wide aisles, high ceilings, and no windows. Clothing, furniture, appliances, seasonal decorations, all crammed into one concrete box. I'd been shopping there for years. I knew where everything was. That familiarity should have been comforting. Instead, it made the silence worse. I started pushing my cart toward the front of the store. The wheels rattled loudly against the polished floor, the sound carrying farther than it ever had before. Each step echoed. Every noise I made felt amplified, like the building was listening. That's when I noticed the lights. Entire sections were dark, not dimmed off. Men's clothing was half swallowed by shadow. Shoe displays faded into darkness a few aisles over. Emergency lights cast a dull yellow glow that distorted colors and made everything look tired and sickly. Mannequins stood at the edge of the darkness, frozen mid-pose, their blank plastic faces catching just enough light to feel unsettling without me fully understanding why. I called out, "Hello." My voice echoed back to me, thinner and weaker than I expected. No answer. I tried again, louder this time, forcing a casual tone. "Anyone still here?" Nothing. I kept walking, faster now, my earlier confidence beginning to crack. I told myself the employees were probably in the back. Big stores like this always have back rooms, offices, break areas. I'd find someone soon. That thought carried me all the way to the front of the store. And then my stomach dropped. The automatic glass doors were sealed shut. Behind them, heavy metal security grates had already been pulled down, thick and final, the kind that don't come down unless the store is done for the night. I stepped closer, waving my arms in front of the motion sensor out of pure habit. Nothing happened. I pressed my hands flat against the glass, cold, unmoving, locked. That's when the reality finally landed. They had closed the store with me still inside. At first, embarrassment came before fear. I actually laughed, a short, uneasy sound that echoed too loudly in the empty entrance. I shook my head, already imagining how ridiculous this would sound later. A grown man locked in a department store because he couldn't keep track of time. I told myself I'd find an employee, we'd share an awkward moment, and that would be the end of it. I looked toward the customer service desk, dark. The register screens were black. The overhead lights above the counter were off. The store phones mounted behind the desk were dead. No indicator lights, no hum, nothing. I stepped behind the counter and picked one up anyway, pressing buttons I already knew wouldn't work. Silence. That's when I reached for my cell phone. No signal, not one bar. I moved closer to the doors, then farther away, lifting the phone, turning in a slow circle like that would somehow help. Nothing changed. The building was a concrete bunker, designed to keep weather out and, apparently, everything else too. My chest tightened, not with full panic yet, but with the kind of controlled fear that tells you something is wrong and getting worse. I started walking the perimeter of the front wall, checking every door I could find. Each one was locked, every handle solid. Red warning signs were posted on most of them, talking about alarms and automatic police response if the doors were opened without authorization. I didn't know how real those warnings were, but the idea of triggering an alarm alone in that building didn't make me feel safer. The air felt stale, heavy, like it hadn't moved since the last employee left. That's when the lights flickered. Just once. It was brief, a quick dip and return, but it was enough to send a jolt through me. I froze, listening. The building settled with a low creak somewhere above me. Far away, I could hear the hum of refrigeration units cycling on and off. My own breathing sounded too loud, too fast. In that moment, standing there under half-lit ceilings in a locked department store, the embarrassment drained away completely, because I finally understood something I hadn't wanted to face. No one was coming back tonight. No employee knew I was still inside. If the power went out completely, I'd be in total darkness. If I slipped, fell, or had a medical emergency, there would be no one to hear me. No windows to shout through. No passing cars to flag down. I wasn't just locked in. I was alone in a building designed to be empty, and whatever happened next, I would be facing it by myself. And the night had only just begun. Asterisk after the initial shock wore off. I did what I'd spent most of my adult life doing whenever something went wrong. I tried to solve it logically. Panic doesn't help you think, and thinking was the only thing I had going for me. I took a slow breath, steadied my hands, and told myself this wasn't a horror movie. This was a mistake. A big one, sure, but still a mistake. Stores like this have procedures, security systems, cleaning crews. Someone would come back eventually. I just had to last until then. The first thing I did was try to retrace my steps and look for a phone that wasn't at the front desk. Many large department stores have phones scattered throughout the building, stockrooms, fitting areas, manager offices. I'd seen them before, hanging on walls with long cords, used for internal calls. I pushed my cart aside and started walking deeper into the store, toward the back corridors marked employees only. Without the music, every step felt intrusive, like I was trespassing somewhere I wasn't meant to be. The emergency lighting barely reached back here. Shadows pooled in corners. The ceilings seemed lower. I passed through the fitting room area. Curtains hung half open, clothes discarded on benches like someone had vanished mid-task. I caught myself glancing at the mirrors more than once, not because I expected to see anyone, but because I didn't trust what my eyes might do in that lighting. Your brain plays tricks when you're tired and alone. In the stockroom hallway, I finally found a phone. It was mounted on the wall, beige plastic, the kind that looked like it. Hadn't been replaced since the early 2000s. My heart lifted for the first time in nearly half an hour. I picked it up and pressed the buttons, dialing 911 directly, hoping the internal line might still route outside. Nothing, no dial tone, no error, just dead plastic in my hand. I hung it up slowly, the weight of the situation pressing down harder now. If the phones didn't work, that meant the building systems had already switched over to after-hours mode. Whatever safety net I was hoping for wasn't there. I tried the fire exits. Next dot, every store has them. Bright red signs, clearly marked. I found one near the back of the building and stood there for a long moment, reading the warning posted beside it. It talked about alarms, police response fines. I didn't care about fines. I cared about getting out. I pushed on the door. It didn't budge. I pushed harder, bracing my shoulder against it. Still nothing. The handle barely moved. Either it was electronically locked, or it had some kind of heavy-duty mechanism designed to prevent exactly this situation. The irony didn't escape me. I stepped back, my breathing heavier now. That's when I noticed how cold it had gotten. Not freezing, but noticeably colder than before. Without customers and staff moving around, without the usual heat of bodies and activity, the air conditioning had settled into a steady, impersonal chill. It crept into my joints, made my hands stiff. I realized then how long the night could actually be. Cleaning crews didn't always come every night. Security patrols were often outsourced and irregular. Morning staff wouldn't arrive until at least 6 a.m. That meant I could be there for 8 hours or more, alone in the dark, with limited light and no way to call for help. I went back to the front of the store and sat down on a bench near the shoe department, trying to conserve energy. My mouth was dry. I hadn't bought a drink. I hadn't even thought to grab one when I still had the chance. Time started to stretch in strange ways. Minutes felt long, then they disappeared altogether. I checked my watch again and again, each time surprised by how little or how much time had passed. Around 10:30, the overhead lights dimmed further. Another system shift. Another reminder that the building was shutting down piece by piece without any regard for the person trapped inside it. I stood up and started walking again, partly to stay warm, partly because standing still made my thoughts spiral. That's when I heard the sound at first. It was so faint, I thought I'd imagined it. A dull metallic thump somewhere deep in the store. I stopped walking, holding my breath, listening. A few seconds passed. Then it happened again, slow, heavy, like something striking a metal surface far away. I told myself it was the building settling. HVAC systems expanding and contracting. Large structures make noise when they cool down. I'd heard that before, but this was rhythmic, deliberate. I followed the sound, moving cautiously, every nerve suddenly awake. Each time it repeated, it sounded closer, or maybe that was just my perception changing, my fear sharpening my senses. I rounded an aisle near the furniture section when the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back right away. For a long, breathless second, the store was plunged into near darkness, and in that moment, standing there with my heart pounding and that distant metallic sound echoing through the building, I realized the most dangerous part of being locked in wasn't the doors, it was what isolation does to your mind. Because once you're truly alone, every sound feels like a threat, and every shadow feels like it's watching you. Asterisk, by the time the store clocks rolled past midnight, I wasn't scared in the sharp, adrenaline-filled way I had been earlier. That kind of fear burns hot and fast. What replaced it was slower and heavier, a grinding awareness that my body was no longer on my side. I hadn't sat down properly in hours. My legs ached. My lower back throbbed the way it does when you've pushed it too long and ignored the warning signs. The cold had settled into my joints, making every movement stiff and deliberate. I started to feel my age in a way I hadn't earlier that evening. I needed to conserve energy. That much was obvious. I found a padded bench near the furniture section and lowered myself onto it carefully, breathing through the tightness in my chest. The store was quieter than ever now. No distant hum of music. No movement. Just the occasional mechanical click or low rumble as systems cycled somewhere behind the walls. I told myself to stay awake. That sounds simple, but it wasn't. Fatigue creeps up on you when you least expect it. The lights were low. The temperature was steady and cool. The silence wrapped around me like a blanket. My eyes kept drifting closed without my permission. I don't know how long I sat there before I realized something was wrong. My hands were numb at first. I thought it was just the cold, but when I tried to flex my fingers, they moved slowly, reluctantly, like they belonged to someone else. I stood up too quickly, a mistake, and the world tilted. The edges of my vision darkened. I grabbed the arm of the bench to steady myself. That's when the warning bells finally started ringing. I'm not diabetic, but I've dealt with blood pressure issues for years. Sitting still in the cold, dehydrated, stressed, it was a perfect storm. My heart was beating too fast, then too slow. Each breath felt shallow, unsatisfying. I needed water. The realization came with a spike of urgency that cut through the fatigue. Dehydration doesn't announce itself politely. It sneaks up, especially in older bodies. I started moving toward the grocery section attached to the store. My steps uneven, my balance off. The aisles seemed longer than before. The emergency lights made everything look flat and distant. I caught myself misjudging distances, bumping into shelves. My mouth was so dry, my tongue felt thick. I reached a refrigerated case and yanked the door open. Dark, no. Power to the refrigeration units. I tried another case. Same thing. The store's backup power clearly wasn't running everything. Panic flared again, sharper this time. I wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. I was in trouble. I scanned the shelves for bottled water that wasn't refrigerated. My hands shook as I grabbed a case from a lower shelf. I tore it open with clumsy fingers and twisted a cap off a bottle, spilling some of it onto the floor. I didn't care. I drank too fast, gulping greedily, coughing as the water went down the wrong way. I forced myself to slow down, knowing better, knowing how easy it is to make things worse when your body is already stressed. I sat on the floor right there, my back against the shelf, the cold linoleum seeping through my clothes. I focused on breathing slow in, slow out, counting each breath the way a doctor once taught me. That's when I made the second mistake. I closed my eyes, just for a second, I told myself. Just long enough for the dizziness to pass. When I opened them again, I wasn't sure how much time had gone by. The lights were dimmer. My watch read 2:18 a.m., nearly 2 hours gone. I pushed myself upright, my muscles protesting, my head pounding now with a dull, insistent ache. I stood and my foot slid. Water I'd spilled more than I realized. I went down hard, my hip slamming into the floor, my head snapping back as I tried to catch myself. Pain exploded through my side, sharp enough to steal my breath. For a few terrifying seconds, I couldn't move at all. I lay there staring up at the dark ceiling, the emergency lights buzzing faintly overhead. That's when the thought hit me, clear and brutal. If I couldn't get back up, this was how it ended. No dramatic rescue. No heroics. Just an older man alone on a department store floor, injured, dehydrated, and invisible. I tested my fingers. They moved. My toes responded. Slowly, carefully, I rolled onto my side and dragged myself toward a nearby shelf, using it to pull myself up inch by inch. By the time I was standing again, my hip was screaming and my confidence was gone. I wasn't just trapped anymore. I was injured. And if something else went wrong, if I fell again, if the pain got worse, there would be nothing I could do about it. That's when I understood the most dangerous part of the night wasn't fear, it was time, because time was no longer on my side, and dawn was still hours away. Asterisk by the time I limped back toward the center of the store. It was clear I couldn't just wait this out anymore. Sitting still had almost taken me out once already. My hip throbbed with every step, sending dull shocks up my spine. I could feel swelling under my pants, the joint stiffening, the muscles tightening defensively around the injury. Every movement reminded me that one more fall could be the one I didn't recover from. I needed help, real help, and waiting until morning suddenly felt like a gamble I wasn't sure I'd win. That's when I started seriously considering the fire exits again. Avoided them earlier because of the alarms, the warnings, the uncertainty. But fear changes the math. At 2 a.m, alone in a locked building with no phone signal and a growing injury, the risk of an alarm felt smaller than the risk of doing nothing. I made my way toward the back of the store where I'd found one of the exits earlier. Each step was slower than the last. I had to stop twice to catch my breath, leaning on shelving, listening to my heart pound in my ears. The building felt even colder now, the concrete floor radiating it upward. When I reached the door, I stood there for a long time, just staring at it. The red sign looked harsher in the emergency lighting, the words shouting consequences I didn't care about anymore. I wrapped my hand around the handle and tested it gently. Locked, I braced myself and pushed harder, using my shoulder this time, careful not to aggravate my hip too much. The door flexed slightly, just enough to give me hope, then stopped. That's when I noticed a small metal box mounted beside the door. Asterisk, an alarm panel. I stared at it, my mind racing. If I triggered it, would it call the police? Or would it just scream into the empty building while I stood there helpless? Worse, what if it locked down the store further? I'd heard stories about modern security systems sealing buildings automatically. My thoughts started looping, circling the same fears over and over. That's when I realized how tired I was. Not just physically, mentally. My judgment wasn't as sharp anymore. Every option felt dangerous. Every choice felt wrong. I made a decision anyway. I pulled the handle. The alarm went off instantly. It wasn't a single sound. It was several layered and aggressive. A piercing siren, a pulsing buzz, a flashing red strobe above the door that bathed the hallway in violent bursts of light. The noise was overwhelming in the enclosed space, vibrating in my chest, rattling my teeth. Asterisk, I flinched back, my heart slamming against my ribs. My hips screamed as I shifted my weight too fast, and I nearly went down again. I grabbed the wall, forcing myself to stay upright as the alarm continued to wail. I waited. Seconds passed. Then minutes. No voices. No footsteps. No announcement over a speaker. Just the alarm. The door still wouldn't open, whatever system was in place. It wasn't designed to let people out after hours. It was designed to keep them in. The noise was unbearable. It drilled into my skull, making it hard to think. My ears rang. My pulse spiked again, fast and uneven. I knew enough to recognize the danger signs: dizziness, chest tightness, shallow breathing. I needed to shut it off. I searched the wall frantically, scanning for a keypad, a switch. Anything that looked like it might silence the alarm. Nothing. The strobe continued flashing, turning the hallway into a nightmare of light and shadow. Every flash made the mannequins and shelving at the edge of the corridor appear to jump closer. Finally, I backed away from the door, retreating toward the open store floor. The alarm followed me, echoing through the aisles, filling every corner of the building. There was no escaping it. That's when something else happened. The lights flickered, not once, but repeatedly this time. The emergency lights dimmed, surged, dimmed again. The alarm faltered for a split second, then resumed, weaker but still screaming. The building groaned. A deep structural sound that I felt through my feet. I realized I'd pushed the system too far. Whatever backup power the store was running on was struggling now. The refrigeration hum cut out entirely. The air went still. Then the lights dropped another level, plunging large sections of the store into near-total darkness. I stood there, frozen, listening to the alarm echo through the darkened aisles. My heart racing, my body aching, and a terrible understanding settling in. If the power failed completely, I wouldn't just be trapped. I'd be trapped in the dark, with an injury, no phone, no signal, and a security system already in distress. I had turned a bad situation into a potentially fatal one, and somewhere deep in the building, something clicked off for good. Asterisk when the power finally failed. It didn't do it all at once. It went in stages, like the building was slowly giving up. First, the alarm weakened, its piercing scream dropping into a warped, uneven wail before cutting out entirely. The strobe light above the fire exit flickered a few last angry flashes, then went dark. The sudden silence that followed was worse than the noise had been. It felt heavy, absolute, like the air itself had thickened. Then the emergency lights dimmed again, not off, not yet, but so low they barely did their job. Long stretches of the store disappeared into darkness, aisles turning into black tunnels that swallowed light after a few feet. The familiar layout I'd trusted earlier was gone. Without full lighting, the place felt enormous and hostile, like I was standing inside something hollow and abandoned. I didn't move right away. I stood there, listening, afraid that if I took a step, something else would fail. My heart was beating hard but uneven now, skipping in a way I didn't like. The cold felt sharper without the hum of machinery, creeping through my clothes, settling deep into my injured hip. I checked my watch. 3:11 a.m. At least 3 more hours until morning staff might arrive, and that was an optimistic estimate. I needed light. My phone was useless for calls, but when I pulled it out, the screen lit up. Battery at 18%. I stared at that number longer than I should have. That was all I had. No charger, No outlets that I trusted anymore. Once it died, I'd be completely blind. I turned the screen brightness down as low as I could tolerate and used it like a flashlight, sweeping it slowly across the floor in front of me. The beam felt pathetic against the darkness, but it was better than nothing. That's when I noticed how disoriented I'd become. Aisles I thought I knew twisted into unfamiliar shapes. Displays cast warped shadows that stretched and bent as I moved. My depth perception was off. More than once, I reached for something that wasn't as close as I thought it was. I moved carefully, favoring my good leg, using shelves for balance. Every step sent a dull ache through my hip, a reminder that one wrong move could put me back on the floor and maybe keep me there. I found a spot near the furniture section again, one of the heavier display sofas, and lowered myself onto it slowly. Sitting hurt, but standing hurt worse. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to keep warm, watching my breath fog faintly in the dim light. That's when the quiet started to mess with me, without power. The building had no background noise. No hum, no clicks. No distant machinery. Just silence so complete I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Every tiny sound I made, a shift of fabric, a breath. A creak of the sofa felt amplified and exposed. My mind started filling the gaps. I found myself replaying earlier sounds, wondering if I'd imagined them. The metallic thump from before, the building noises. I told myself, over and over, that it was just structure settling, just cooling systems, just physics. But logic is fragile at 3 a.m. Injured and alone, my phone buzzed suddenly in my hand. I nearly dropped it for half a second. Hope flared, irrational and intense. A signal, a message, something. It was just a low battery warning, 15%. I laughed, a short broken sound that echoed too loudly. The laughter faded quickly, replaced by a tightness in my chest I didn't like at all. Stress does strange things to your body, especially when it's already compromised. I forced myself to slow down, breathing deliberately, counting again. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't panic. Panic wastes energy. That's when I heard the sound again. Not loud, not sudden. A dragging noise, slow, irregular, somewhere far off in the dark. I froze, holding my breath, straining to listen. It happened again, a soft scrape, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. My rational mind kicked in immediately. Cleaning equipment, a loose cart, something shifting as temperatures changed. There were a dozen explanations that didn't involve anything threatening, but none of them explained why it sounded closer than before. I stood up slowly, pain flaring, and turned in place, sweeping my phone's weak light across the nearest aisles. The beam caught shelves, signage, empty floor, nothing moving. The sound stopped. I waited, seconds, stretched. My arm trembled from holding the phone up too long. My hip ached. My mouth was dry again. I became painfully aware of how vulnerable I was injured, nearly blind, battery draining. The sound didn't come back. Eventually, I sat down again, telling myself I was imagining things. Fatigue does that. Fear does that. I repeated it until the words lost meaning. I checked my phone. 12%. That's when the thoughts settled in, heavy and unavoidable. If I lost the light, I wouldn't just be alone in the dark. I wouldn't be able to move safely. One bad step. One unseen obstacle. One fall, and that would be it. The night wasn't over yet, and I was running out of everything that mattered. Asterisk, by the time my phone battery dropped into single digits, I stopped checking it. Watching the number fall had become its own kind of torture. Each percent felt like a countdown I had no control over. I turned the screen off completely, plunging myself into near total darkness, and sat there listening to my own breathing, until my eyes adjusted as much as they could. It didn't help much. The emergency lighting was barely there now, a faint glow that did more to outline shadows than eliminate them. Shapes blurred together. Depth vanished. The store felt less like a place and more like a void filled with obstacles I couldn't see. I shifted on the sofa, trying to ease the pressure on my hip, and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through me, sharp and hot this time, stealing my breath. I clenched my teeth and waited it out, sweat breaking across my forehead despite the cold. That's when I heard it. Again, footsteps. There was no mistaking them, this time slow, measured, somewhere. Near the front of the store, my heart slammed. So hard I felt it in my throat. For a split second, relief flooded me, overwhelming, irrational relief. Someone was here. Security, police, anyone. I pushed myself upright, ignoring the pain, and called out, "Hello." My voice cracked. It sounded small in the darkness. The footsteps stopped. I waited, holding my breath, straining to hear anything else. Seconds passed. Then the steps resumed, slower now, cautious. I called again, louder. "I'm locked inside. I need help." No answer. The footsteps changed direction. They were coming toward me. I stood there, frozen, suddenly unsure of everything. If it was security, why weren't they responding? Why no flashlight? No radio chatter? No announcement? My mind raced through possibilities I didn't like. I turned my phone back on. 6%, the weak glow illuminated just a few feet in front of me. I angled it toward the aisle where the sound was coming from, my hand shaking so badly the light jittered across the floor. A silhouette appeared at the far end of the aisle. Human. Definitely human. But something was off. They weren't wearing a uniform. No reflective vests, no badge. Just dark clothing that blended into the shadows. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they were taking their time. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure stopped. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Asterisk, then they spoke. "Stores closed." The words were flat, calm, almost bored. Relief and fear collided in my chest. "I know," I said quickly. "I got locked in by mistake. I need help. Can you call someone?" The figure didn't answer right away. They shifted their weight, and I heard the faint jingle of keys. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. They stepped closer, just enough for my phone light to catch part of their face. A man, maybe late 30s, early 40s, unshaven, tired eyes. Not surprised to see me. "You shouldn't be back here," he said. "I'm not back here," I snapped, frustration breaking through. "I was shopping. They locked me in. I'm injured. I need out." He looked past me, scanning the darkness behind me, like he was checking if anyone else was there. That's when it clicked. He wasn't security. He was a cleaner. One of the overnight contract workers who come in after hours. No uniform, no authority, no obligation to help beyond his job description. and maybe, judging by the look on his face, no desire to get involved. "I don't have access to the doors," he said finally. "I just clean." "You have a phone," I said. "Call your supervisor. Call the police." He hesitated. That hesitation scared me more than the darkness had. "Alarms already went off," he said slowly. "I don't want trouble." "I already had trouble," I said. "I fell. I could have died in here." He looked at my stance, the way I was favoring one leg, the sweat on my face. Something shifted then, not sympathy exactly, but calculation. He was weighing effort versus risk. Finally, he pulled out his phone. I nearly sagged with relief. He made the call right there, speaking quietly, turning slightly away from me. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly, just fragments. "Yeah, guy stuck inside. Alarms earlier. Says he fell." The call ended. He looked at me again. "Police are coming," he said. "Might take a while." I nodded, afraid that if I spoke, my voice would give out. We stood there in the darkness, an awkward distance apart. Neither of us sitting, neither of us relaxed. The store felt different now, not safer, but no longer entirely empty. Time crawled. My phone buzzed one last time, 1%. I turned it off and slipped it into my pocket, saving whatever was left for later. The cleaner leaned against a shelf, arms crossed, eyes drifting toward the front of the store. That's when the sirens finally cut through the silence, distant at first, then closer. The sound hit me harder than I expected. My knees weakened. I had to grab the shelf to stay upright. Emotion crashing into me all at once. Relief, exhaustion, anger, embarrassment. When the flashing lights finally painted the front of the store blue and red through the security grates, I knew it was over. But as the officers made their way inside, one of them looked at me and said something I didn't expect. "You're lucky," he said. "Another hour in here, and this could have gone very differently." He was right, and I didn't fully understand how right until much later. After the police escorted me out of the store. I remember stepping onto the cold pavement outside and taking a deep, shuddering breath. The night air never felt so good. My legs shook under me, the pain in my hip and back now undeniable, but at least I could feel the ground solid beneath my feet. I was free, alive. That relief was instantaneous, sharp, overwhelming, and long overdue. Officers were asking questions, taking notes, and occasionally glancing toward the closed store, which now seemed almost sinister in the harsh floodlights of the patrol cars. I could barely speak at first, my voice cracked and raw from shouting earlier, from exhaustion and maybe from fear that had built for hours. I stumbled through an explanation. The store closed before I had a chance to exit. The alarms, my fall, the darkness, my fall, dead. My hip injured, the whole ordeal condensed into a messy string of sentences that probably sounded insane. Paramedics arrived quickly, and I let them examine me. X-rays later revealed I'd only suffered a severe bruise and minor sprain. Nothing broken, but it was enough to leave me limping for weeks. My blood pressure had spiked from stress, dehydration, and panic, and I was lucky to walk out without more serious complications. The physical injuries were minor compared to the mental toll every time I closed my eyes in the following days. I could still feel the darkness, the cold, and the oppressive silence of that massive, empty store. The store management issued a formal statement the next morning. They admitted to a procedural error. Someone had failed to check the sales floor before locking up, and the employee responsible for the final sweep had miscounted or assumed all customers had left. They claimed it was an isolated incident, but reading the statement gave me little comfort. It was one thing to survive an accident. It was another to know that it had happened because of negligence in a building designed to be secure. I went back to the store weeks later for groceries, for something mundane, and everything looked normal again. The lights were on, aisles crowded with people, music playing in the background, but I couldn't stop looking at the emergency exits, at the metal grates, at the dim corners that had swallowed so much of the night. What had felt safe and familiar was now alien to me. I could walk through the same aisles I'd wandered alone, but I could still feel the anxiety lurking just beneath the surface, as though the walls themselves remembered. Friends and family didn't quite understand. "It's just a store," they'd say. How scary could it really be? But they hadn't been alone in total darkness, injured, cut off from help, with every sound amplified and every shadow a potential threat. They hadn't counted the hours, minute by minute, fearing that one wrong step could end them. And maybe that's why I started sharing this story publicly, to explain that the scariest places aren't haunted houses or movies. They're ordinary, familiar spaces that suddenly become hostile when the rules change, and no one is there to help. I still think about that night often. Not constantly, but enough that I check the time before I shop late. Enough that I avoid the last sweep of any store if I can help it. I've become hyper-aware of emergency exits, staff presence, and the subtle hums of electricity that give life to these massive buildings. The experience changed me. Not just my shopping habits, but my perspective on risk, isolation, and vulnerability. I realized how fragile the illusion of safety is and how quickly ordinary places can become dangerous if you're caught unprepared. The story stays with me because it is, in a very real sense, a warning. A reminder that human error and procedural failures can turn a routine trip into a life-threatening ordeal. That night, I survived by a combination of luck, quick thinking, and the eventual appearance of another human being, someone who could act, even if reluctantly. I can't undo the fear, the exhaustion, or the pain I felt, but I can tell the story, share it with others, and hope that someone listening will be more careful, more aware, and maybe avoid experiencing their own long, terrifying night locked inside a place they assumed was safe.